"Sir, step away from the vessel." That was the first thing I heard as the police cruiser lights painted. The water in violent streaks of red and blue. The reflection rippled across the marina like a warning sign. My houseboat, my pride, my weekend escape suddenly looked less like freedom and more like a crime scene. Neighbors had gathered along the boardwalk, arms crossed, whispers darting between them like minnows. And, in the middle of it all, there she was, Marlene Whitaker. HOA president, part-time tyrant, and full-time menace. She stood on the dock in a crisp white blouse, arms folded, chin raised, as if she were the mayor of the sea. She didn't call 911 because of an emergency. No, she called the cops because I dared to dock my own houseboat. Let me tell you, there are humiliations in life you prepare for: bad haircuts, awkward family reunions, losing an argument to your GPS, having the cops called on you for illegally parking your boat. Not on the list. I raised my hand slightly, not because I was guilty of anything, but because 3 uniformed officers were now shining flashlights across my deck. "Evening, officers," I said, voice steady, though my stomach had tied itself into knots. "Is there a problem?" "There's been a report of trespassing," one of them replied. The word trespassing slapped me across the face. Before I could explain, Marlene piped up from the dock like she'd been rehearsing for this moment. "This man is not a resident," she announced. "Our bylaws are perfectly clear. Only community members in good standing may utilize the marina facilities. This houseboat," she said it like it was a dirty word, "is unauthorized." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "I am a resident, Lot 12, been there 6 months, and I've paid every fee you've shoved into my mailbox." The officers glanced at one another. One lowered his flashlight. Marlene didn't budge. "Temporary housing doesn't count," she snapped. "The marina is reserved for permanent homeowners. He is not permanent. He is a drifter." A drifter. That was her favorite insult, one she'd been sprinkling into every HOA letter she sent me. I'd collected them in a neat stack in my kitchen drawer: violation notices, warning letters, and my personal favorite, community appearance complaint. Apparently, my boat, moored at the far edge of the dock, ruined the uniform aesthetic of the waterfront. That night, though, it wasn't about paperwork. It was about power. I tried reasoning with the cops, pulling out my driver's license, proof of address, even the HOA dues receipt. The lead officer gave me a sympathetic look, then turned to Marlene. "Ma'am, this doesn't look like trespassing. He's listed as a resident." Her face soured, lips pursing so tight they nearly vanished. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "This man is violating Bylaw 14C, subsection 3. I will not have our marina turned into a trailer park on water." The crowd murmured. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed by her theatrics. For me, it was both mortifying and illuminating. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Marlene had declared war. The officers, to their credit, de-escalated quickly. One leaned toward me and muttered, "Just maybe talk it out with your HOA, sir. Nothing criminal here." With that, the flashing lights dimmed, the cruisers rolled out, and the neighbors began to scatter back to their homes. But Marlene stayed rooted, glaring at me like a queen who'd just been defied. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. "This community has standards. You will not turn it into a circus." I stepped off my boat, the dock creaking under my weight. "Funny," I said, meeting her eyes. "I thought paying thousands in dues meant I did belong here." Her smile was razor thin. "We'll see." And with that, she spun on her heel and stormed away, binder clutched to her chest like a weapon. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about a houseboat. It wasn't about bylaws or aesthetics or even property values. It was about Marlene needing to prove that she could bend the rules to her will, and that anyone who challenged her would regret it. When I walked back onto my boat that night, the marina was silent. The air smelled of salt and gasoline. The only sounds the soft slap of water against the dock and the echo of Marlene's words in my head. I looked at my stack of HOA letters and realized they weren't nuisances anymore. They were ammunition. Because if she thought she could embarrass me into leaving, she was dead wrong. This was no longer about my right to dock. This was about drawing a line. And for the first time, I found myself smiling in the dark, already plotting my next move. Little did Marlene know, she had just handed me the perfect reason to fight back, and I wasn't planning on fighting small. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers." That's how Marlene greeted me the very next morning, binder tucked under her arm like it was a holy relic. No good morning, no hello, just straight to the threat. She stood at the end of the dock, sunglasses glinting in the early light, looking like a general surveying her battlefield. I hadn't even had my coffee yet. My boat still smelled like last night's fried eggs, and the gulls overhead were squawking louder than my alarm clock. But there she was, already armed with paperwork, handing me a thick envelope with my name scrawled across it in aggressive block letters. Violation notice. Again. If the flashing lights from the night before had been humiliating, this was salt in the wound. I ripped open the envelope right there on the dock and skimmed the text. Improper use of community facilities. Failure to maintain community aesthetic standards. Potential breach of Marina policy. 3 violations and 1 notice. She was efficient, I'll give her that. Seriously? I said, holding the pages up. You had the cops here last night and now you're stacking paperwork on me before breakfast? She smiled a thin, satisfied curve. The rules are the rules, and the board will not tolerate freeloaders. Freeloaders? I paid my dues. Her sunglasses slipped down her nose just enough for me to see her eyes, sharp as glass. This community has standards, Mr. Carter. You may pay your dues, but you don't fit. That word fit hung in the air like the smell of gasoline drifting off the dock. Behind her, I caught sight of 2 neighbors pretending to water their potted plants while clearly eavesdropping. One gave a nervous wave. The other shook his head as if to say, "Don't poke the bear." But Marlene wasn't a bear. She was more like a vulture, circling, patient, waiting for weakness. Over the next week, the notices kept coming. One about the noise from my generator. Another accusing me of excessive clutter because I left a fishing pole leaned against the railing. My favorite was obstruction of scenic view. Apparently, my boat was ruining the sightline for some couple's morning yoga routine. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so exhausting. Each notice came with the same threat stamped in bold. Failure to comply may result in legal action. I started to notice the whispers, too. At the marina, at the mailboxes, even at the grocery store 2 miles away. People muttered about Marlene's crusade against me. Some found it entertaining. Others found it troubling. One neighbor, Mr. Daniels, pulled me aside in the parking lot. "She's obsessed with purity," he whispered. "Not just of the water or the property. Purity of image. If she doesn't like how you look or how you live, she'll bury you in notices until you break." I asked him why no one stood up to her. He laughed bitterly. "Because everyone's afraid of being next." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the stack of violation notices spread out like cards in a losing poker hand. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Outside, the marina was quiet, except for the occasional lap of water against the hull. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about selling. But then I remembered the way Marlene had smirked as the cops left. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted me humiliated. And that changed everything. I started keeping meticulous records, dates, times, the exact language of each violation. I photographed every angle of my boat, every slip number, every receipt of payment. I printed out the HOA bylaws and highlighted the contradictions. If she was going to fight me with paperwork, I was going to build a paper fortress of my own. The turning point came at the next HOA board meeting. They hold them in the clubhouse, a beige-carpeted room that smells like disinfectant and burnt coffee. I showed up early, binder in hand, just to watch Marlene's reaction. When she saw me, her lips tightened. Members only, she said. I held up my binder. Lot 12, dues paid. Member. For the first time, she didn't have a snappy comeback. Just a flicker of annoyance before she waved me in. The meeting was classic HOA theater. Discussions about mailbox paint colors, arguments over lawn gnome sizes, someone complaining about kids riding bikes too fast, and then Marlene cleared her throat, binder open, and announced, "We have a serious issue to address regarding misuse of our Marina facilities." She looked right at me. I sat back in my chair, heartbeat steady, and slid my own binder onto the table with a satisfying thump. A few board members glanced at it. Marlene continued her speech, waving around her stack of notices like she was defending the Constitution. But this time, the neighbors weren't nodding as enthusiastically. Some frowned. One whispered, "Is that even in the bylaws?" I didn't say much, just enough to make it clear I wasn't rolling over. But when the meeting adjourned, I caught Marlene glaring at me across the room. "You think this is a game," she whispered as she brushed past. I smiled. "No, I think it's just getting started." As she walked out, clutching her binder tight, I noticed something I hadn't before. A crack. Not in her binder, not in her rules, but in her confidence. For the first time, she looked less like an untouchable queen and more like a cornered animal. And that was when I knew Marlene wasn't invincible. But if she was rattled, she'd come back harder. And I had no idea just how far she was willing to go to win. I own the Marina now. That's what I said, flat as a stone dropped into still water in the middle of the HOA meeting. For a moment, the room went silent, like the air itself forgot how to move. Then the whispers started. Shocked gasps, muffled laughter, someone choking on a styrofoam cup of weak coffee. And at the center of it all, Marlene Whitaker froze. Her precious binder, slipped an inch from her grip. She recovered quickly, but not quick enough. Everyone had already seen it. The first crack in the armor of a woman who'd built her identity around being untouchable. Now, I didn't walk into that meeting planning on theatrics. I'd spent weeks quietly laying the groundwork, watching her drown me in violation notices, threaten me with legal counsel, and whisper poison about me to the neighbors. What she didn't know was that while she was obsessed with my boat, I was having coffee with the real owner of the Marina, a tired old businessman named Frank who'd been itching to sell the property for years. To him, the Marina was a headache. Constant complaints, minimal profit, endless HOA squabbles. To me, it was the perfect opportunity. So, while Marlene fired off certified letters, I signed paperwork with a notary. While she sharpened her speeches, I transferred funds. And when the ink dried, the title of the Marina, every dock, every slip, every bit of shoreline access shifted into my hands. That night, the meeting had been routine chaos. Someone argued about hedges. Someone else brought up kids skateboarding on sidewalks. The air smelled of burnt coffee and Lysol, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry bees. And then Marlene, in her usual flourish, stood and declared that we needed immediate action to protect the sanctity of our Marina. She waved her binder like it was scripture. Our community cannot tolerate outsiders bringing down our property values. This man's boat is a stain on our reputation. That's when I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and said it. That's funny, Marlene, because as of last week, I own the Marina. The silence was delicious. One board member coughed. Another muttered, "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm serious," I said, sliding a neatly folded document across the table. "Here's the deed. Filed, notarized, recorded. The docks, the slips, the parking lot, the shoreline, all of it. It's mine." For a moment, no one knew where to look. At me? At Marlene? At the piece of paper that had suddenly shifted the tectonic plates of their entire little kingdom? Marlene's face turned a color I can only describe as Pinot Grigio left out in the sun too long. "This is absurd," she snapped. "The Marina is part of the HOA's jurisdiction." "Actually," I said, tapping the document, "it never was. It's private property. Frank just leased access to the HOA, and he was more than happy to cut ties when I made him an offer. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "So, our fees." Another chimed in, "Does this mean we've been paying dues for something we don't even own?" And just like that, the spell was broken. Marlene's power had always depended on perception that she knew the rules, that she controlled the space, that resisting her was futile. But now, her authority looked flimsy. The very people she lorded over were beginning to question the kingdom she claimed to rule. She tried to recover, of course. "This man is manipulating all of you. He doesn't understand the responsibilities of community governance." "Maybe," I said with a shrug, "but I understand contracts. And the only contract that matters here is the one with my name on the Marina." That line landed like a gavel. People leaned forward, murmuring, shifting in their seats. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider. I was the guy who had just flipped the board's power dynamic upside down. The mini-climax came when one of the quieter board members, Mrs. Klein, raised her hand. "Marlene, if the HOA never owned the Marina, why have we been charging fees for it all these years?" The room turned on her like a school of fish changing direction. Questions started firing. "Where's that money gone? Why didn't you disclose this? Have we been misled?" Marlene's binder shook slightly in her hands. She stammered something about allocations and community enhancement projects, but the veneer was gone. The neighbors weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her, and they weren't smiling. I didn't gloat, not yet. I just sat back and let the weight of the revelation sink in. Because the truth was, I didn't need to humiliate Marlene. She was doing that to herself, unraveling in front of the very people she once commanded. As the meeting spiraled, I caught her eye. For the first time, she didn't glare. She looked rattled. A queen watching her crown slide into the water. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't over. Buying the Marina was a knockout punch, yes, but people like Marlene don't vanish quietly. They claw, they plot, they find new ways to claw back power. When the meeting finally adjourned, neighbors clustered in small groups whispering heatedly. Some congratulated me. Others asked nervously what this meant for their access to the docks. I just smiled and told them we'd work something out. But as I walked past Marlene, binder clutched tighter than ever. She leaned in close enough for only me to hear. Her perfume was sharp, her voice sharper. "You think you've won," she hissed, "but you've just made yourself my enemy." I stopped, met her eyes, and said, "Marlene, I didn't buy revenge. I bought the whole Marina." Her face hardened, and in that split second I knew she wasn't bluffing. This war was far from finished.